Good. So can we welcome Mr. Patrick Kuwana? Patrick, welcome back to Lifework. It's good to see you, and thank you for your willingness to just come and share your life with us.
Always a pleasure. It's such an honor, and I mean, the work that you guys do is amazing. What else can I say? Yeah.
Thank you. You know, there are many topics we cover, and it's always difficult to find case studies on integrity. You know, people that are willing to come and share from their own lives and, you know, lessons learned and so on. So we really appreciate you coming this afternoon. But before we get to all those details, maybe take us back to that little young boy. Where did Patrick grow up? Those first school years and so on.
Sure, you really want to take me back there. I'm actually originally from Zimbabwe, born in a little city called Mutare, which is just on the Eastern Highlands, just by the Mozambican border. Was born in Mutare. My parents were both teachers, so I come out of a family where education and discipline was pretty much the order of the day. My handwriting had to be perfect. My grammar had to be more than perfect, but it was all good. So I have two elder brothers, and a younger sister. So yeah.
Then after school, where did you go and study, and what did you study?
Okay, so I did my primary school in Mutare, and then high school I went into boarding school in Harare, studied at Churchill High School in Harare. And then from Churchill High School, I then went and decided to move in the computer field. So I studied computer engineering at the University of Zimbabwe. And then when I finished my computer engineering, my very first job was with the IBM agent in Harare, in Zimbabwe.
Yeah. Now, especially the ladies in the audience always love to hear those romantic, you know, stories. So I happen to know that you've been married to Maud for 22 years, and you have two boys. But maybe tell us that first moment you saw her, and it was all butterflies, and you know, give us those details. When was your first kiss, and you know, so on?
Yeah, is this being recorded? just to check. It's actually an interesting story because Maud and I actually knew each other from the time we were 12, because our parents were actually family friends. We actually were in the same church. We went to the same junior school. So I think I played bit of soccer, bit of rugby. She was into hockey and basketball. So I think on those sort of school trips when you go and play the other school across town, and you're sitting in that
on the bus,
yeah,
right?
on the bus,
the
and
back seat
you
of
know,
the
bus. Let's not put it like that. That seems a little bit too drastic. But yeah, So it's a high school, you know, type of relationship that started off there. We then got married in 1996, and the Lord has blessed us with two boys. Both boys are in boarding school just down the road at St. Albans. So Tino Tenda, our eldest, is in Form 4. So he's got one more year at school next year, 17 years old. And our younger one, Tadiwa Nashe, he is in Form 2, 14, turning 15 in November. Yeah.
I'll have to come for some parenting lessons there. Our eldest is turning 13 soon, so please pray for me as well as we're on this journey. It's exciting, but as parents, we can learn a lot.
Yeah.
So when did you come to South Africa? And you know, was it your work? When did the family move here? And maybe tell us a bit about your corporate career as well.
Okay, so the transition from Zimbabwe happened in 1994, just after the democratic change here. And what brought that about is at the time I was working for NCR. You might not even remember that there was a company called NCR. NCR was really big into ATMs, automated teller machines, and I was part of the very first few people in Zimbabwe who were installing ATM machines. And this buzzword, the buzzword at the time was networking. This is before all this real networking that we have. And they sent me to come and do a training course here in Joburg. And I did this networking training course at this huge company that was called Dimension Data, that operated from a little office like this in Randburg before Dimension Data became what Dimension Data is today. And met with a whole bunch of people there, and as soon as the democratic process was happening here, one of the guys I met on the course then said to me, listen, would you be keen to come to South Africa? Because we really think, we need somebody of your caliber to come and join us. So August of 1994, I was on my way to Johannesburg and worked for a company called ACNet, which was part of the Denel group, well, the Denel structure, Denel Informatics, Arms Corps, etc. So my very first living quarters in South Africa were actually in the Denel Arms Corps facility just down the road here. In 1994, I worked for them for a couple of years and then decided to move over to HP, Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett-Packard had just come back into the country after leaving South Africa and having a distributor. They decided to buy out the distributor and come fully fledged as HP into the country. I started off in the sort of technical area of HP, eventually left the technical field, went more into commercial, and then ended up with a heading up the telecommunications division for HP in Africa. From HP, I then progressed forward to Oracle, the software company, where I headed up the strategic projects division at Oracle. And then my final corporate job was with Computer Sciences Corporation, another big American multinational, where I headed up their sales division. I was their sales director. So we did all of the outsourcing of Old Mutual's entire IT infrastructure, NetBank, etc. And then, 2005, I then decided to venture off into the entrepreneurial world and established a small boutique investment company. And through that investment company, the first venture that we got involved in was we identified the opportunity that was starting to sort of swell up in South Africa around the 2010 World Cup. So in 2005, what ended up happening is we set up a joint venture with the Press Association Group, the PA Group, which is one of the big media organizations in the UK, and we established a company called PA Sport. And basically what PA Sport does, if you're big sporting fans, if you watch sport on SuperSport and they come up with your wagon wheels, this player has touched the ball 20 times, this team has X amount of possession, all those running live statistics, that's basically the company that we established. We had a whole system behind that. We fed live sports information into your SuperSports, your SABC, and we basically commercialized sports content. And then again, on the back of that, we then also started a mobile services company, content services company, because we had all the access to live sports content literally from across the world. We packaged it, delivered it on mobile phones. We did deals with the mobile operators. So that was the entrepreneurship venture then. And that started in 2005.
That's an impressive CV, and you climbed the so-called ladder of success, made the money, got the corner office, held the positions, made some more money, and went global. So looking in from the outside, it might almost be wow, you've made it. You know, you've had it all.
Yeah.
But then a point in 2011, you had a spiritual father in America, and he challenged you to go and write down a few things, maybe a few dark secrets. And would you mind maybe reading that letter to us today?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely fine. What I'll do is let me give you a little bit of a context behind this letter as well. I think for me in 2010 was probably where I was at the stage where there was a deep discontent within me, and that deep discontent was really centered around a wrestle with a couple of questions. And the primary three questions were centered around where I was wrestling around the situation of, why do I live in a country that claims to be Christian majority, and yet we don't see Christian culture prevailing? Because in any given environment where you have a majority of people who believe in something, your culture should prevail. And therefore, it just didn't make sense for me that we have all these nations that claim to be Christian, but yet the culture was not consistent with what they say it is. So that bothered me a lot, and it really challenged my faith in a very big way. The second question, I think, as a business person, that I wrestled with was a question of, so why is it that God has given us the privilege to live on the continent that He has blessed with such an abundance of resource, but yet we are failing to convert that resource into sustainable wealth for all Africans? Again, as a business person, it just didn't make sense why we have so much resource, but why we're not doing something with it. And then, if you will mind, the third one is a very provocative one, but I trust that we are good enough friends and we are talking about integrity, so you'll appreciate it. The third one was really very personal for me, and that personal one was I wrestled a lot with God to say, God, when I see the face of systemic poverty and the face of disease and social ills in the world, I see the face of an African. And I have a major problem with that. And I said, God, if you are truly a God of all people who loves all people equally, then as somebody who you have given this skin color, I have an issue with the way the land, the way things are, because somehow it's not making sense for me why the face of poverty is typically somebody who carries the same skin color that I have. So that was my wrestle with God. And God has subsequently answered all of those questions for me as I've journeyed along. But the first point in the answering of that is where this letter came in. So I'll read you the letter. So this is just a letter I wrote. This is May of 2011. And this came out of a challenge that my mentor asked me the question, what are the deepest, darkest secrets that you've ever had in your life that maybe you've never been able to share with anyone? Think about them and decide if you are willing to face them, and maybe if you're willing to go a step further and actually face them together with me. And after that challenge, this is what I wrote after a sleepless night, writing this down. So here goes. Here lies Patrick Kuwana, who today submits himself to completely die to fear, guilt, and shame by confessing to you. I've had major sexual immorality issues for many of my adult years until God's grace and mercy rested upon me in 2005. Prior to getting married, I indulged in premarital sex, with one of these indulgencies resulting in a pregnancy that I was responsible for and participated in the abortion thereof. And therefore, this made me a murderer. In 1996, I got married to Maud, and we now have two precious sons, Tino, who's 10, and Tadiwa, who's 7. That's at the time. At the time of our marriage, I was a corporate high flyer. and my monetary success was more important to me than God and my wife. Within a couple of years into the marriage, I started having extramarital affairs, several over the period of about 7 years. A couple of these encounters involved unprotected sex, and at one point I was even worried that I might have contracted the HIV/AIDS virus. Thank goodness, by the grace of God, I did not, as I could easily have murdered my own wife and my children. During this period, I got exposed to strip clubs and developed an addiction to go several times a week. It was so bad that there were days I even went by myself after work just to have a drink. My low point is that I even tried what it felt like to pay for sex, and hence fell into the trap of prostitution. I also fell into the trap of pornography with magazines, websites, and even videos. During this whole time, at one point I even had the audacity to raise my hand and slap Maud when she confronted me about my whereabouts and my behavior. She endured my abuse, my drunkenness, my disrespect, and my selfishness. Even though I was earning a top salary, I squandered most of our family money fueling this lifestyle. I even had the audacity a few times to spend money on gifts for my adulterous partners instead of focusing on the needs of my wife and my children. Today, I still have the issue and are dealing with the debt trap that I dug for myself and my family. I've come to realize that I've also been a thief, as I have cheated the tax department, and this is something that I'm still trying to resolve. There are many areas in my business that I have not dealt honestly with people and correctly declared the usage of company assets. In summary, I've stolen from my business partners that have put their trust in me. Today, my wife does not know the majority of this, and I ask you to pray with me that God will reveal how He wants me to deal with this and with Maud, and that ultimately I will fear God more than anything else, and that I'll be obedient to whatever He chooses for me to do.
That is a letter and a half. Thanks again for sharing it with us. So you face 3 dilemmas here. So you confessed, you reached a point where you realized this life is empty, and even though people looking in from the outside might think, wow, he's arrived and he has it all, you were empty on the inside. And I know you were elder in your church at that time. So it was leading this double life. And you reached that point where you then asked God for forgiveness. And He forgave you, and it must have been liberating, that moment just to say, Lord, help me going forward. I want to change my life. But the 3 dilemmas, and we have a custom here at LifeWork. We have very intelligent people in the room, business people who are faced with challenges, solving problems every day. That's what they're all good at. So we're going to break for a few minutes and just discuss around our tables what you would have done in his shoes facing those 3 dilemmas. Dilemma 1, you've received forgiveness from God, so do you have to go and confess to your wife? Do you have to share this letter with her? God has forgiven me. Should I go and tell her about all these? Second thing, should I go and confess to SARS? So there's been some tax issues. Do I go and, confess whatever that might have been? And then the third thing is your business partners, who you alluded to, stealing from, as you put it. So let's discuss around the tables. You've confessed your sin. God has forgiven you, but you go and confess to those 3 people, and bear in mind the possible consequences. So let's hear those creative answers. Patrick, we're all ears. What did you do?
Yeah. So the way this story progressed from there is probably the best picture I can give is as I prayed about this and really just exposed what was in my heart to God and went through the process with God. The best picture I can paint is the picture of God walking the journey with Abraham, and at the point where Abraham was to sacrifice Isaac. And for me, the Lord basically just said to me, will you trust me enough to give everything back to you if you go forward and do what I'm calling you, or what I'm asking you to do? So that was the picture that I had. And it was basically a case of, you could lose everything, but will you trust me enough that I can give it back to you? So the 1st of June of 2011, our offices were based in Rivonia. I invited Maud to come over, have coffee in the office. And in the office on the 1st of June of 2011, I read her exactly what I've read to you now. And I read her the letter, and I asked her, would she be in a position to forgive me for what I had put her through? Again, I probably have never seen a bigger outpouring of the grace of God in one moment, because her response to me was, Patrick, this is very hard, but I choose to forgive you. That was literally her response at that moment in time. This is very hard, but I choose to forgive you. I think I was also very fortunate that I had a prayer warrior and an intercessor as a wife, because she had been praying for me for many years. Not to say that from that point onwards, things just suddenly came right. It was the start of a journey of God really helping us deal with some root issues that mainly I carried, that I had to work through. Issues around insecurity with identity issues, even going back into some childhood issues, and really unpacking the source of why my behavior was manifesting in that way. So it was a time of great healing for myself in terms of being able to really look at myself and see what was going on, but also within the marriage setting, and then even further within our children. So that was really the first point. A few months later, as we continued walking on this journey, and at the time, I had really been wrestling around the business side of things. And again, on the business side of things, I really felt God saying, you need to make right where there's wrong. And towards the end of 2011, I attended a board meeting with my partners, the PA group in London. And in that board meeting, we had already agreed with Maud that I would start the process of actually exiting out of the company and getting new management to come and take over. And we agreed, we did exactly that. But as I walked out of that meeting, I felt it wasn't it. I mean, I was literally on the train, on the tube in London, going to a niece's place where I was staying, and I just felt a heaviness. And that night, I called Maud and I said to her, I think what God is actually asking for here is actually more than just me stepping down from my executive role. I think what God is asking here is we need to step out completely from this. And what basically we then felt we needed to do was to go back to our partners and literally say to them, we have not been faithful partners, these are some of the things that have been taking place, and we ended up literally asking them to put together their lawyers, and we signed the shareholding that we had in that business completely back to them. We gave them the business, and we did not walk away with a cent from it. So by end of 2011, we had given them the business, and yeah, but you know, we had no business, and we just felt God say to us, it's a journey of restitution. You know, you've made right where you were wrong. You're not trusting in money. You're trusting in me more than you trust the money. And that really started quite a wilderness journey. By 2012, we had lost our house, we had lost all sorts of other things. We were sort of really going towards the route of close to destitution type of thing, where everything just disappeared, you know, because we had, you know, all these things that we carried that we just couldn't continue to maintain. You know, work just didn't come. It's almost as if a door closed. And on the third one, we also, you know, went to SARS and just said, this is what the situation is. This is where we are. We're no longer in the business anymore. But the burden of what was there was still largely on my shoulders. And I was in a position where I had no work, I had no business to pay the SARS from. But again, you know, negotiated with them in terms of how we would settle it and get that side right. And we've slowly walked that journey. But for me, the most critical thing was the healing within my own self. And I think, as you correctly said, one of the groups there, it's about will I forgive myself, and will I come to a point where within myself I have the freedom to know that I can walk wherever I go and know that I'm right with other people. And I think part of the process was, and I think, sorry, I didn't get your name, the lady who gave the feedback, as I realized later why it was so critical. And by the way, please never take these things as being a formula. God will reveal to you what needs to happen. There's no such thing as formulas in God's way of doing things.
I saw some people get very stressed and uncomfortable. So thank you for just leaving that.
Please, it's never a formula.
God might not tell you to go and do the same.
You need to work it out with your God in terms of how he wants you to deal with any given situation. But I think for me, the reason why it had to go that route was because, as you correctly pointed out, in the back of her mind, she knew. And I think for the real healing to have taken place, it was important that the confession and the asking for forgiveness came, because it showed a real sincerity and the fact that I was willing to do that, rather than just ignore it, because then for her, the healing would never have come for her if that process hadn't been started. So that's, again, I'm giving you my thoughts in terms of why it had to be like that, but it's not a formula. Yeah.
It's now 7 years later, and that wilderness time, it sounds like it wasn't just easy. Yes, your wife forgave you instantly, but I'm sure your marriage took hard work, and maybe even possible damage to your relationship to your boys, and financially. You know, how long did that wilderness period last?
You know, I think, you know, we have these seasons where the wildernesses come and go, and I think the Lord uses those to keep us humble and to keep us absolutely reliant on Him. So within the marriage, you know, we probably have the strongest marriage that we can think of today. Because God has really brought a deep spiritual and natural healing to us. And it's actually just a pity because, the timing of this, because I would have really have loved for Maud to be here for her to give you her side and how this worked for her, because occasionally we actually have these discussions together. So the Lord really, from my perspective, it was a journey of intentionality. When that sort of thing happens, you almost then have to be very intentional in terms of how you move forward, because when that amount of trust is broken, that trust can only be built up over time through intentionality. And both of us, but I had to be very intentional about really putting her first in my life. And really just giving her the confidence that I had turned a corner. And God was really gracious to help us with that. Exactly the same thing with our children. Also, helping them to go through the process where, their dad was never quite at home. Their dad never quite participated in their sporting events. Their dad was never quite there. And you have to put in intentionality. So, for example, I think Marcel, who knows me quite well, I always say to people, my diary is now based on what my family is doing. And I'll structure my diary around that. I've made a commitment to my boys. They're big rugby players. I've made a commitment to them. I will not miss more than 2 matches during a rugby season, and therefore if people invite me to go somewhere or I have to go for a business meeting, I will be back on a Saturday. If I can't be back on a Saturday to watch the match, I'm not going to be going on that meeting. I'm not going on that trip. It's just the way it is. It's a level of intentionality so that we can rebuild trust. But I think before I go to the financial, the ultimate of it, and I've never read this one before because this was only from last year. So this is my eldest son, who's at St. Albans. When they are in Form 3 at St. Albans, they go off on what they call a journey, which is basically a 23-day trip where they go off, and it's almost like coming into manhood, and off they go, camping, no communication, no nothing. And the only way that you've got communication with them is through writing letters. And my son, he went off in March last year for his 20-day trip, and this is one of the letters that he wrote to me while he was on the trip. So I just want to read you this letter. Dear Dad, I've had the opportunity to read your letters multiple times over the journey and the solo session. It is currently 8 a.m. as I write to you. Thank you for keeping me updated with sports at school and on TV. In terms of me being the first Kuwana to play in the forward pack, what I can say is I was born to create history. Through the solo session, I've learned a few things about myself, but I feel like there's been a new fire set for God inside of me. Lastly, I would just like to tell you how proud I am of what you have done. When you first left your job to start your new business, I noticed that we weren't receiving the same amount of income as we used to do. At first, I thought that you were being silly and selfish. But as time went on, I realized it was courageous. God had called you into crossover, and you obeyed. Most people wouldn't be able to do that. After having all your faith and your hard work, God has started to open doors for you and for us as a family. So I just wanted to say thank you for being the amazing man that you are. So that was from my 16-year-old son last year. And for me, there was no more ultimate thankfulness to God for the rescue process that he took us through as a family. So even though we had many financial issues, we still continue to slowly build up our financial position. But through all of this, what we've realized is that it's just not about the money. Yes, the money We need it. It's a resource we need. But ultimately, there are more important things. And I think the more we focus on the more important things, God does open up the door for the money, for the wealth, the riches, and everything else. So we're still pretty much on a recovery process, but we're good.
Wow.
Yeah.
What an incredible story. And maybe you can just give us advice. You know, the business leaders, church leaders in the room, certain lessons learned, you know, maybe especially on the road to recovery. Were there certain things you put in place to protect yourself from possibly, you know, having a moral lapse again, or any of those past issues to reoccur? And maybe some of those pit stops just to win the trust then of Maud again?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's accountability is absolutely critical. I have a group of close people who I walk in accountability to. They know what I'm doing at any given time. I make sure that my activities are extremely transparent and that I share what's on my heart at any given moment. And they speak into me if if they see anything in me that's not quite on the right track. So I really believe having people, close people around you who you can share anything with is absolutely critical, because it's not an easy journey to walk by yourself. You need people around you who can counsel you, who can share with. I think on a family front, we have something that we call a social covenant as a family. And what the social covenant is basically literally a document that we've written as a family that basically says, this is how we're going to treat each other, this is how we're going to behave, and if we don't do that, this is how we deal with it. So I'm held to that social covenant by my children. As part of that social covenant, I will not miss more than 2 rugby matches. And if I was to miss more than 2 rugby matches, my children can come and say, but Dad, you made this commitment. Same thing with Maud. I have certain commitments with her that I will not, she holds me accountable to that. But it's about transparency. The more we are transparent with the people close to us, but the more that we build a network of people that we are willing to be transparent with, I believe it helps us keep to the road that we are saying we will commit to. Because you see, integrity is about, am I truly who I say I am? Am I truly, is what I believe truly the way I behave? Because if there's an inconsistency between who I say I am or who I claim to be and my behavior, then that's where mistrust builds. Because as soon as I say Patrick is this, but my behavior is over there, immediately you will not trust me. And it's therefore important to keep that gap as narrow as possible. But I think even more importantly, that's the very gap between us and God. If we really trust God and if we really trust His word, then are we willing to be consistent with what He says? Because that's really the journey that we're trying to walk out. So, yeah.
Basically, run out of time, but in short, 2 minutes, can you tell us about this organization called Unashamedly Ethical? I know that people can go and Google it and, figure out how to get involved, but what that calling is, what it is you guys are doing, and then also the business you're involved in with Crossover.
Okay, just a very quick one. Unashamedly Ethical is really an organization, a movement that is really centered around mobilizing people towards a lifestyle of ethics, values, and clean living. It's really a movement to try and mobilize, give people tools, and it's an accountability system, exactly the same thing that we've just been talking about here, that basically says, if we are truly the people that God has called, and when God says, when my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, when they will pray, seek my face, turn away from their wicked ways, then God will do this. So it's basically really a network and a movement to basically say, guys, join in, let's walk this journey of accountability together. Because again, if we say we're 80% Christian, and yet we have the level of corruption that we have in the country, it can't be just non-Christians who are being corrupt. We have to build a level of accountability, because that's the only way we can begin to deal with things like corruption, etc. So if you want to become part of that, please just go unashamedlyethical.com is the website. But even on your mobile phones, if you have a moment, just go to joinue.net and you can get into there. Then on the crossover transformation side, again, very quickly, my passion is to see real economic, complete rebuilding of economies in Africa. It's wild to even think that. But over the years, through this journey and up to now, what God has really been doing has been starting to reveal components of what I call an economic system that we've actually coined a name for, and we call it the economics of mutual value co-creation, because we really believe that if we are to fulfill the mandate that God has given us to be good stewards of the world, and to actually fulfill the mandate to be fruitful, to multiply, and to be full, which is what he gave us in Genesis 1:28, which I believe is an economic mandate. If we are to fulfill that mandate, it's not going to happen through the current system of capitalism that we see, because capitalism is breaking everything, but there's a new system, and we believe that the components of what God has been revealing over time is, in our view, the part of a system that will be able to literally run economies of nations based on a completely different system to the current form of capitalism that we do. So that's the one element of what we're doing, really looking at economic trends. How do we completely shift the way that we view the economy, and therefore how businesses run within a new world, a new economy? But also we use a lot of those components to do projects in businesses where we use those different components to transform businesses into businesses that will fit in a framework that we believe is God's framework for a business, and God's framework for prospering a business that's based upon his principles and his view of the reason why businesses exist and what businesses' role is in bringing about economic transformation in nations. So that's basically, it's a bit of a mouthful, but yeah.
The Bible is a great user guide, eh? We use a manual, and it's filled with those principles of
absolutely.
what to build things on.
Absolutely. I mean, if I look at the last couple of years, I mean, I can literally say to you, from Genesis 1:1 to the end of Revelations 22, if you choose to view the Bible, reading it with the eyes of business and the economy, I can guarantee you from the first verse until the last, all you will see is business and economy. It just depends what glasses you want to put on when you read the Bible. But, one of the biggest lessons for me over the years is no longer to read the Bible from a one-dimensional view, but to literally put on, if I'm in business and I'm in economic stuff, I want to put on my business economic glasses and say, God, what are you saying from here all the way to the end, and how does this apply to business and the economy? And I can guarantee you there are just so many secrets and treasures in that when we do that. So yeah.
Patrick, do you mind praying for us?
Oh, I would love to. Love to. Okay. Father God, we lift up your name.